So we have titled the series as The Gospel According to Daniel. And when we try to look at the book of Daniel, I just found that most of the sermons people preach are on those specific instances, in the Daniel in the lion's den or being thrown in the furnace. But Daniel is a book people are really usually not very comfortable to preach about because it's so big and so long. But God has given us this particular book of the Daniel because it has tremendous good news for all people who are living at all times, and especially the good news that we are going to get from this chapter today. I have titled it as Hopeful Living in Hopeless Times. And beginning in this chapter, actually in the originals, the language switches from Hebrew to Aramaic. This is one of the few parts of the Bible that has Aramaic in it because that was the language the Chaldeans and the Babylonians were comfortable as they have this conversation with the king, and it's preserved like that for us to get its authenticity. What we are going to look at today in this particular chapter is how two very different people who are faced with some of the most hopeless situations they can be in life and see how they drew hope from that. We all can go through times or moments in our life when our lives can get impacted and we feel hopeless. The two contrasts between the two people can't be any bigger than what it is. One of them is the greatest king of the then known world, King Nebuchadnezzar. Not only did he have the greatest and mighty empire, he accomplished something that lasts still today as one of the 7 wonders of the world, if you all remember, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. That was this guy. Think of creating a product that lasts not just for 1 generation or 2 generations, for more than 1,000 years. Impactful living, right? That's the guy. Guess what? Even he can have a hopeless situation creep up on his life. Now, the other guy who is experiencing a hopeless situation is at the extreme other end of a spectrum. He's a young refugee boy, less than probably 20 years old, who is living in an unknown world in an unknown culture with no support structure or anybody to help him. And you can see this contrast not just in these two different people, this king and this refugee boy whose name is Daniel and gets another name as well in the place that they are, but also you can see the contrasts, which is mind-boggling in these two different people. One would normally expect that if you are in a position of high power and influence, that you're going to handle any crisis that can be thrown at you. And one would expect, if you're living in such dire situations, you're the one who's going to need all the help. And you see in this story, God just beautifully flips the script. It's the person who is this refugee kid living in this pagan culture who finds hope and not just has that to himself, he's able to take it and pass it along to this greatest king who has everything in this world except hope. That makes this some exciting book to read, isn't it? Most of us would have asked this question to ourselves: where is God during times when things seem hopeless? As soon as Daniel goes to Babylon, the king has a terrible dream and is distressed. It really freaks him out. In ancient world, such dreams were thought to be foreshadows of the future that's presenting itself. And so the interpretation of the dream was very, very important for that purpose. And in fact, it's not something that only was there in olden days. Dreams are a way of showing sometimes to us what our deep anxieties are. if you're worrying about certain thing, or if something is upsetting you, then you tend to have all kinds of dreams, isn't it? And God used those dreams, back in the day especially, to create an awareness of Him in people's heart so they can come to Him and find Him. And for us, the thought process is also similar. Sometimes as you think, if I aspire for higher roles of leadership or promotion, life would be easy. But one of the biggest fears for King Nebuchadnezzar was he had enemies all around his empire because he had conquered pretty much most of the then known world. There was everyone who was waiting to come back at him. It always comes with a cost when you try to climb up the ladder, isn't it? When you're just an entry-level person, you have one fire to fight, and then when you go all the way up, you have 10 fires to fight, and then you realize, oh, I don't realize this comes with this. Or sometimes, when you think your life is going great, and then you have an extremely high-pressure work environment, you're giving your heart and soul, and then you hear of layoffs or something that threatens your existence, that can create anxiety and stress too. And what happens in those moments is sometimes we respond like Nebuchadnezzar. He gets paranoid. And he wants to get the best enchanters, the diviners, the Chaldean wise men. And we think, well, let me first talk to all the experts, go to therapy maybe, read up the articles related to how the stock market is doing, or Google all the conditions for the diagnosis. Let me do a self-diagnosis of this health condition, or take to really find out what's going on. I don't know about you. If I have a sprain, I need an MRI. I want to know exactly which muscle is experiencing that. Somehow I think that will calm me down, but usually has the other extra result, isn't it? Nebuchadnezzar did not know God. He was a great and mighty king, yes, but he does what most of us would do when you're anxious about something and we don't know what to do. Right? And you see very graphically what are the feelings that someone in that situation goes through, and you and I can perhaps understand with those feelings, isn't it? So we read the first thing that happens, you will all agree with it. In verse 1 and 3, it said 2 times, is his sleep left him. The first sign of anxiety or distress is sleeplessness. You're not able to sleep. And secondly, we read the next emotion, he goes through his anger and frustration that he shows on his wise men. And his anger is not just an ordinary anger. He's telling them, because he doesn't trust them, he thinks maybe they formed an alliance with his enemies and they are using them to misguide him. And so he says, I'll tear you from limb to limb. I'll destroy your homes. He doubts his best people. Verse 8, we read that. And his anger turns to fury in verse 12. It just escalates from one level to the other. Sleepless nights, anger, doubt of people even closest to him, and fury. Why would this happen? If you try to find hope in all the systems or powers or things of the world, they only lead to these emotions. Why does things that come into our life give us anxiety? If you think about it, you can identify the real root cause. The root cause is it's related to us not knowing what's going to happen next. We don't know how this is going to turn out to be. Will the sickness, how debilitating will it be? Will I get cured? These layoffs, am I next on the blocking chop? Is my job going to be gone? And then what happens to me after that? Anything could happen, and that's the fundamental problem. Because we don't know what comes next, we get very, very anxious. We don't know how we are going to do. One of the sports I enjoy doing and you heard it was a triathlon. We had a race yesterday. After a long time, I got to do this race together with our elder, Rajan, and we have given him the nickname Cool Elder. Not because he's cool in like other ways, but this is what happens. So the race starts, and I'm there 1 hour before the race because I want to know everything. What's the water temperature? What's the elevation we are going to ride our bikes on? And how's the running route? And all of these things. Do I have enough hydration? Do I have enough fuel to get me through? The race is about to start, and Rajan is still not there. He shows up like 3 minutes before the race starts, and we are in the water. He doesn't have his goggles. And I asked him, Rajan, don't you think you need goggles? Oh, yeah, maybe I do. He doesn't have his wetsuit, and water is like 68 degrees. It's like, I think I'll be fine, And then he doesn't have his, numbers stuck on everything. I was looking at him, and I'm like shocked. How can someone not have anxiety in a situation like this? And I've been begging him to tell me the answer. He still now refuses to do that. He's like Daniel, so chill. Should be thankful God's given us a cool elder like him. But who really knows what happens next? Only God. God is the only one who knows what happens next to us. So the first point I wanted to share is hope in hopeless times comes from knowing that God knows. It's a very simple thought, but it's a very, very powerful one. Only God knows what happens next, and that knowledge of the future only exists within God. So Nebuchadnezzar is seeking information, access to some data, encrypted, that can only be authorized by God himself. Even his wise men tell him, King, what you're asking is so unfair, because he wants them to tell his dream and the interpretation. How on earth could anybody do it? Even they tell him, King, only gods have that information. You can be the greatest king on earth. You can be the smartest guy in your field. You can be on the top of your game, at the heights of your career. But I can guarantee you, when God sends something into your life and you're having those sleepless nights, you will not find answer for that from anyone or anywhere. You just don't have access. That was the response of King Nebuchadnezzar. And now let's look at how was the response of Daniel. Daniel's response seems so hopeful, isn't it? First of all, Daniel doesn't even have a clue of what's going on. The way he comes to know about it is when people are coming to kill him. That's when he comes to know. And what happened to Daniel in the first chapter? That was a big high, isn't it? He had a great job. He passed through the Ivy League's top schools, landed one of the best jobs. And he thought, man, my life's now going to be great now that I have graduated. And, I'm in this great company. I'm working for a great boss. We are doing an incredible product. We are on top of the world. And then he hears he's going to get killed. At least for Nebuchadnezzar, the threat was just in a dream. Though it could have been a real threat simmering in its borders and some geopolitical stuff going on, we don't have access to that information. But for Daniel and his friends, the threat was not a dream. It was real and immediate and imminent. They were going to get killed. Wow. What can be more hopeless than this? It's like your doctor comes and tells you, hey, you look great, but you have cancer. You're going to die in 24 hours. That's the impact. That's the shocking news Daniel gets. Now look at his response here. How does Daniel and his friends who knew God and had a relationship with this God, had access to this information that exists only within God, look how they respond compared to how Nebuchadnezzar did. They didn't have sleepless nights. They didn't have anger. They didn't have rage. Verse 14, it says they responded with prudence, discretion, wisdom, boldness, and courage. You know, when the wise men, in verse 16, you read that, Daniel is actually walking up to King Nebuchadnezzar. He has the audacity to stand before this king who had just now told his best men that he will not give them any time. They have to tell him right now and fix his problem. He has the audacity and the courage to go and stand before this greatest king on earth and says, King, give me some time. I'll come tomorrow and interpret this for you. Courage. Unearthly courage rather than fear or anxiety. And not just courage, confidence. He tells the king, I can show you, king. I can tell you your dream and I can interpret that for you. And then he goes and tells his friends to seek God and pray for the mercy from God of heaven. And this is the first clue you get. Because Daniel realizes, hey, this information, I don't have this. This is in a totally different elevation and level. It's a God of heaven who has this, and he has to have mercy to show me this. He has that understanding. And not just that, he knows this is a big mystery. And only God knows this mystery, who can reveal it to him. And he ends up, instead of having sleepless nights, he prays about this. And guess what happens? The information is de-encrypted. The person, the God who holds this information, reveals himself. But this is something you will see again and again and again in the Bible, that God only reveals this to those who have a relationship with him. He reveals what is hidden from normal human eyes that cannot be understood or perceived purely by reason to those who have a relationship with him. You can be the smartest guy on earth, the most powerful guy on earth, but have absolutely no clue about the purpose of your life or about what the future holds. Isn't it awesome that God is revealing something that he is hiding to the greatest king of the earth to a slave refugee boy, Daniel? Knowing that God, knowing Daniel's God of heaven, and resting that my God knows my future is what will give us hope and remove anxiety. When we know that this God knows my future, then we can be hopeful. And you can only know that if you have a relationship with this God. And that brings our next point. You know, hope in hopeless times, the first point was hope in hopeless times comes from knowing that God knows. The second point, in hope in hopeless times, comes from knowing God, just knowing God. You know, people come to the Silicon Valley to make it big, isn't it? We know that we have the top 1% of the richest people living in just one zip code. We have the world's smartest people from all countries who live in Silicon Valley because everyone came here with a dream. When Steve Jobs, who was the founder of Apple, when he was diagnosed with cancer and was about to die when he was 55 years old, what happened to him was he was desperately anxious and trying natural therapy. He went to Buddhism because he had dabbled with that a little bit when he was younger in India. He was trying to find this answer. He was a Nebuchadnezzar of our times. He didn't get the answer till he died. Because God does not reveal himself to those who don't love him. because that's the nature of truth. You know, when Pilate in the New Testament, we see this guy is the most powerful guy in the Roman government. And when Jesus is brought before Pilate, he's accused of all sorts of things. Pilate also has a sleepless night. He has dreams. He cannot sleep. And then his wife tells him something, and then he tries to somehow protect Jesus. And he's unable to convince people because everybody wants to crucify him. He stands and stares right into the face of Jesus and asks him one of the most mind-boggling questions anyone could ever ask Jesus. He asks him, "What is truth?" And you know the response that Jesus gives to Pilate, the guy who had the power to kill him? Silence. Jesus does not respond to Pilate. And there is a reason why. Pilate and many of the most powerful and the smartest people in the world think they can find truth purely as a scientific enterprise. Isn't it? Scientific truth can be found through empiricism, through empirical data. That is something that is tangible, that is measurable, and that is repeatable, is scientific truth. But scientific truth is not the whole truth. What about the truth about life and death? What about the truth about pain and suffering? What experiments can you devise to measure pain and diagnose and prognose it? What experiments can you devise to understand death and life after death? What experiments can you devise to figure out suffering? And people have tried it with no effect. We can call this the realm of social truth. Something that anyone would agree, even science cannot tell us. So not all truth is just scientific truth. There exists truth beyond the realm of science. And who has that knowledge is God Himself. Truth is not just a set of propositions that we can learn and know. The reason why Jesus kept quiet before Pilate is because truth is personal. In fact, truth is a person. Because Jesus Christ said, "I am the truth." If you're trying to think of truth just cerebrally or intellectually or philosophically, you will not find it. If you try to think of truth just as scientific and empirical and pursue, you will not find it. If you try to think of truth as mystical and esoteric and try to find it somehow inside you, you will not find it because you don't have it inside you. It only exists in God, and God sent truth into this world through the person of Jesus. And when you have that relationship, when you pursue that Jesus, He will reveal it to you. And God, from the beginning till now, reveals Himself through covenants. From Adam and Eve till now. Again and again, He makes covenants with people and tells them, you know what is the sum and essence of His covenant? I will be your God and you will be my people. I will be in you and you will be in me. And He wants to draw us into this, the most kindest, the most sweetest, the most glorious experience that human beings can ever have. But to be able to do that, we need to get down from our proud intellectual position, from our proud philosophical position, from our proud worldly accomplishments and standards. And that's why He brings all those things into our life so we can be humbled. It requires humility because God gives grace to the humble and stands opposed to the proud. This humility, it cuts at the heart of human pride. And the most graphic description of that is, says a young boy can know more than the mightiest king. Isn't that amazing? I wonder who his parents were. They taught him well. They discipled him well. As we dedicate Eva today, that's the kind of parents you guys want to be for Eva. That gives hope. And he bursts into thanksgiving. Suddenly the narrative switches into a poem and a prayer right in the middle of this chapter, because Daniel knew God, and he knew this God would answer him. What all the things that he knew about his God, you can ask yourself if you have the same knowledge of God. We read in verse 20, Daniel is not just talking from vacuum. It's not an empty rhetoric. He's going and giving the speech to the greatest king who can just kill him like that. His faith is from his knowledge of God. And what does he know about this God? First, he says, to God belongs wisdom, king. You can have access to the greatest resources, but you don't have access to wisdom. Other knowledge can be obtained elsewhere. In the second part of verse 20, he says that. Second, he says, to God belongs might. Just knowing does not help. He alone has the power to enforce things to change, which even you, as the greatest king, do not have. And he's demonstrated that he's the one who changes seasons. He has power over nature, verse 21. He changes kings. He has power over all the empires, verse 21 again. And he says he gives that wisdom and knowledge to those who have understanding. He has the power to empower someone with what he knows, verse 21. And not just that, he has the power to reveal hidden and deep things, verse 22, because he is an all-knowing God. And lastly, verse 23, he is also a personal God. That's what we understand about Daniel's knowledge of God from what we read. So he goes up to the king. He shares the gospel to the king instead of immediately telling the answer to what he needs. The king just wants an answer. That's how it usually happens. People don't seek God. People don't know God. People don't care about God. They don't want to go near God. But when a tragedy happens, they want you to pray for them. They want to have God do everything to fix their problems for them. And they come, they just want to hear only that. But God is not just interested in solving your meager daily life problems. He is interested in drawing you into a covenantal relationship with him. So Daniel goes to the gospel, and he shares the gospel in a nutshell, verses 27 to 30. He first tells him what is the gospel according to Daniel. In Daniel chapter 2, it's right here, right smack in the center of it. Hey, we crossed half the chapter. Only half more left. Verse 27 to 30. He says about God that he is in heaven, he reveals mysteries, and he has graciously shown something to you about your life. He's a gracious God. And then he shares his own personal testimony. He says, I'm not sharing this to you because I am smart, but I can do his plans, purpose, and plans. Are you growing in your knowledge of God? Not just knowing about God, but experientially knowing him. And not just knowing that Jesus died on the cross and he saved you from your sins, but knowing that this Jesus is actually resurrected and he's reigning as a king who overcame death, who overcame the most painful suffering. He's alive right now. His kingdom is here. He's building that. We'll talk about that in a minute. And he's going to come again. That's the kind of experiential knowledge we're talking about. You can enroll in 10 different Bible studies, read the Bible from front to back or back to front and still miss this. If you don't have this understanding and experience of connecting with the resurrected Christ who is reigning as a king and relishing being in God's presence, you don't need to be asked, read your Bible, pray every day. If that's a chore to you, if you're thinking, oh, if I am tired, I don't want to read it today, you have no idea. You don't know this God. You don't know this Jesus. But if you have a taste of this resurrected Christ, his resurrection power, Paul says, is at work in us. The same power that worked in raising Christ Jesus from the dead is at work in you and me in Ephesians chapter 1. If you have that experience, you would long to be in his presence. And we have his word that can help us to do that. Daniel had to access that information in a very supernatural way back in a time when they didn't have the entirety of the whole counsel of God. And God spoke to him and revealed to him what Daniel had, that now you and I can have every day through his word. Let me ask you, my friends, I'm not trying to put guilt on you, but really to ask if you have a way to experience this knowledge of God. Do you have a plan to read your Bible? You know, they did a research, I might have shared before in my sermon, I'm not sure if I did, pardon me, that they did a survey of 8,000 people, I think sometime back in 2008 or 2010, and they asked people, what difference does reading the Bible make for them? They tracked those who said they just read once a week, twice a week, thrice a week, 4 times or more a week. And for those who read only once or twice a week, it had no effect, absolutely no effect. And they thought maybe if it's 3 times, it will get better, still no effect. But they found for those who read at least 4 times a week, it actually had significant effects. The stunning findings included the following. They found for those who were reading the Bible at least 4 times a week, their feeling lonely dropped by 30%, anger issues dropped by 32%, bitterness in relationships dropped 40%, alcoholism dropped 57%, sex outside of marriage dropped 68%, feeling spiritually stagnant dropped 60%, sharing your faith jumped 200%, discipling others jumped 230%. 4 times a week. That's what it takes. For those who want empirical data, I know you're all data-driven engineers here. Data for you. Ask yourselves, is this data driving me to pursue being in God's presence every day? We are on to our third point. So it's hope in hopeless times comes from making God known. Or specifically, hope or hopeful living in hopeless times comes from making this God, who is the King of Kings and is building his everlasting and greatest kingdom, known to the world around us. And here's where we get to the dream. The second part of this chapter. The dream is pretty straightforward. Daniel goes to him, hey, king, here's the dream you had, and tells him this dream. In this dream, the man had a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, middle and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And suddenly a stone is cut out of the mountain without any human hands. It rolls down the hill, smashes the statue into a powder. The wind blows the powder away. There is no trace of that big statue left anymore. But then suddenly, this stone begins to grow. It becomes a huge mountain, so huge that it fills the whole earth. There are 2 things about this dream that stands out. This dream, the central elements, there's a statue and there's a rock. And we need to just lock in to understand what is the truth behind those things. You know, there are different interpretations of the dream. People get lost in its details. You know, some commentators say, these depict the 4 kingdoms that are going to come after Babylon. Traditionally and historically, they have been identified as the Babylonian kingdom, and after which came the Medo-Persian kingdom, after which came the kingdom of Greece through Alexander the Great, whom we all know conquered the whole world. And after that came the Roman Empire, especially that was what was there in the time of Jesus. Well, that sounds like a nice interpretation. Perhaps there are elements of it that are true, but the real focus point of the dream was not just about the statue. It was about the foundation of the statue. You know, we'll talk more about it in Daniel chapter 3 as to why Nebuchadnezzar was so upset about this dream is that for his entire lifetime, he actually wanted to build a huge, dazzling statue. A statue of liberty-sized monument of himself. He always wanted that. He came to Babylon with a dream, like most people come to the Silicon Valley with a dream to make a big name for themselves. It was a dream of the kingdom, but it was a dream of building his own kingdom. It was a dream to make himself something great again. This towering colossus statue looming over the world was something he always wanted. And that's why he came to Babylon to construct it. Like I said earlier, that's why people come to Silicon Valley, isn't it? Now, he's been pretty successful, emperor of the world, single most powerful person in the history of the world. He's probably one of the 20 powerful people who have ever attained most power in the history of the world. But the dream comes and says, you have feet of clay. Who would build this towering statue and put a feet of clay? And the subliminal message in the dream is, hey, king, as golden and as great and as valuable it looks, basically you're weak underneath. You have feet of clay. Your foundation is crumbling. Your foundation is flawed. Your foundation is weak. So weak that all it takes is just a stone. Not even a big boulder, a stone can come and knock the whole thing down. He's scared to death. You can read it in an individual way and in a cosmic way too. If you go to the big city with a dream, most of us do, like Nebuchadnezzar. Most of us don't go with quite the same size of a dream as Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe Silicon Valley is an exception. Everyone wants to come here, and if you're born and raised here, the dream for people is after you go to one of the Ivy Leagues or UCs, you start up a company and you're supposed to retire by 35. So if you are 35 and above and you have not retired, you're a loser in Silicon Valley. That's the dream. I'm not saying that. That's what Silicon Valley tells you. And that's the pressure it puts on us when you work, puts on the children, and drives everybody crazy. I want to be a billionaire before I'm 30. Because we want to be dazzling. We want to create a dazzling image of ourselves. And when we know we can't do that in the real world, then you start doing it on Instagram Reels. At least here, let me be dazzling, isn't it? Somehow. We want the world to see and tell us, hey, you're special. Some of us do it with our looks. Some of us are literally trying to look great. I mean, you can walk around and drive around or go to any city in a gym, and you spend time in the gym. You see how people are willing. There are all kinds of new gyms come out. There's Orange Theory, Blue Theory, Black Theory, CrossFit, skydive. There's no limit to all the things, or triathlons, For someone who's crazy like me, it makes us believe that if you go in that, you can actually look great. It doesn't work out, as you can see. And spend terrific amount of money. But sometimes people do look incredible, I usually avoid that side of the gym. Because people come to be dazzling. Some people don't work on their bodies, but they're still trying. They've come with a dream of a kingdom. They've come with a dream to build something, to show the world something. But what is God saying to Nebuchadnezzar? He says to all of us, he says, if you build your greatness, if you build your life on anything other than me, you're going to be haunted with these kinds of dreams, these kinds of fears. You're going to be haunted with anxiety. If you build your life on popularity, you want to be the most popular kid in your school or college, you're going to be scared by the polls. If you build your life on money, you'll be scared by what's happening in Wall Street. You're going to be checking the stocks every 10 minutes. If you build your life on your looks, you'll be scared by what's happening in the mirror. The mirror doesn't lie, and the scale, they both don't lie. Whatever you build your life on, says they are feet of clay. You know it. If it's not me, it's fragile. Because I'm going to bring it down. At some point, something is going to come into your life to show you what your foundation is. If you built your whole life idolizing your children, that's going to break one day. You have a dream of a kingdom, but it's your kingdom, and anyone who has a dream of any kingdom but my kingdom is going to come down. Someday, my kingdom will come and smash the systems of the world. It will grow into a kingdom that is different, a kingdom not based on your glory, but my glory, a kingdom based not on oppression, but justice, a kingdom not based on war, but peace. That's the meaning of the dream. So, my dear friends, what is the foundation you're building your life on? May I ask you that? If it's on anything other than God, it will not stand. You know, we are right now in the heat of the election system, and you know, they call that, people now have election anxiety about who is going to be the next president, and there is obviously you and I, Christians, have to exercise diligently our vote, understanding the candidates and where they stand and what are their policies and all of that. But our faith is not on the kingdoms of this world, on the kings of this world, or the president of the United States of America, because we have a God who's bigger than the president of the United States of America. Do you spend as much time you fight or think or quarrel or research on the candidates with spending time in knowing about the God who's bigger than all these candidates? If your time is disproportionate there, you have a problem, my dear friends. Because it does not matter at the end who becomes the president of America. It matters how the church is operating as a church, how you and I are caring for the broken, the orphan, the destitute, the needy, the widow in this world. That's going to spread the justice of God, the love of God, the peace of God, and the mercy of God. It's your responsibility and mine. You know, if a young refugee boy, knowing God, makes him greater than the mightiest king, isn't that encouraging for you and me to pursue that God and make that God known to those around us? If you're spending time trying to make the policies of one particular president or party known more than the time you spend on making this God known, my friends, we have a problem. That's what you and I are called to do. By all means, go and vote for your favorite presidents, research them, do them well, but our faith and our sight is fixed on this God who is greater than the greatest kings in this world. You know, my kids have a favorite song they keep listening every time they get in the car by Josiah Quinn. It's called The Prodigal. And I've been drawn to the words of the song, and if you've listened to it, it seems very apt and very fit for us in these times. It says, I've been sick and tired of being sick and tired, searching far and wide for something that feels real. I need something real. I don't want to lose my soul chasing after things that don't lead me straight to you. And then he goes on and says this, probably could be a commentary on Daniel chapter 2 in contemporary words. Says, I don't need the money. I don't want the fame. I don't want what I can't take with me in the grave. It's a modern day hymn for you, my dear friends. He says, now I'm running home like the prodigal. The second icon, the image in this dream, is the rock, the stone. It's not cut by any human hands. It comes and it smashes this kingdom into pieces, destroys all the other kingdoms, and it starts growing, because that's the kingdom of God. Sat preached a sermon for us some time ago on the parables on on the parable of the mustard seed, how it's so small and yet it's going to grow so big and it's going to occupy the whole world. You know why? What is that rock? Here is the gospel again, embedded in this chapter, my dear friends. That rock we know is Jesus Christ. We read about that in the New Testament. He is the stone the builders rejected, but he has now become the cornerstone for a whole new world. And this Jesus has come, his kingdom has arrived, and it's breaking forth in your heart and my heart, and it's breaking forth in this world, and it's going to come in its full realized form when he comes again, when all the kingdoms of this world are going to be subject to him. Read with me Revelations chapter 11, verses 15 and 16. It says, "Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, 'The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever.' And the 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshiped God." And Jesus is inviting you and me to be part of that kingdom and to make that kingdom known to this world around us. If Christ the King will destroy all kingdoms and is the King of all kings, we can have hope that he is bigger than the most hopeless crisis we are going through, which may be caused by anyone or anything. And he, just like he did for Daniel and his friends, can thwart all evil directed towards his children and can change them for good. Amen? Doesn't that give you hope? We cannot even lift our finger to change any of these hopeless situations, but we have a huge God, the God of Daniel, who was able to do something amazing. Daniel went through a hopeless situation that was about to take his life. God proved that he's bigger than his situation, bigger than the greatest king on earth, and his faith led him to experience the power of God in those situations. And what happens next? He gets elevated into the highest place of influence, which God is calling you and I to do, to go into our city and influence. If we have this faith, we can have hope in hopeless times, and God can use that to bring home to our nation and even the king. And that's what you can do even in your offices, in your neighborhoods. When people are feeling hopeless, when they are in a situation like that, and they don't know what's next, you can introduce them to this God who knows their future. You can introduce them to this God and encourage them to pursue him as their king and his kingdom and not their kingdom. And you can encourage them to see Christ, the rock, who is immovable, always there with us in all our life situations, and lead them to Christ. That's the gospel according to Daniel in chapter 2, my dear friends. Let's